Hey everyone, and welcome back to the MERN Stack Crash Course. In this episode, we're going to start designing our React pages. The first page, as you know, when we launch our app, is going to be this landing page we have right here. But we're going to save designing this page for whenever we do user authentication. So let's start with the home page first. To get to the home page for right now, as you remember, I can just type /home, and this will bring us to our home page. On most blog sites, the home page or the main page simply contains blog posts that are filtered by the recency. For example, we may have the most recent 5 blog posts displayed on the homepage with their name and a short description, which allows the reader to click on whichever one interests them. We may add more later, but that sounds like a great starting point for our homepage. But we want to grab all of our blog posts from MongoDB, show the most recent posts, and allow users to click on them. Let's get started with that implementation. Also, real quick, off camera, I asked ChatGPT to write me some sample blog posts, and I actually uploaded these blog posts to MongoDB manually. So now we have what looks like actual blog posts instead of just random text like we had before. If you recall the episode where we built the functions to interact with the backend, remember that we stored all of that functionality in this api.js file, where we have functions like getPost, createPost, and so forth. Lucky for us, we already have this whole getPost function here, which will allow us to easily grab all of our posts off of MongoDB, which we can use for our homepage. So to use it, we'll navigate to our homepage file here. It should be in the pages folder. Homepage right here, and let's import that function actually from our API. We'll say import get post. I don't know if it's going to do it or not. We'll say import get post from, let me actually shrink this down and look at the files real quick. Let me change something real quick. I just realized the earlier when we made these components and pages folder, we should have put them in this source folder here. So I'm actually going to change that right now. I'm going to, it shouldn't hopefully not break anything. I'm going to cut and paste these folders into source. I'll cut and paste again. And let's fix this error real quick. We may need to change some of the routing here. So we need to actually real quick to fix that. I'll just go into here, and all of these should just be // not .. I believe. So let's just fix that real quick. Go ahead and save this, and maybe this will fix it. There we go. Okay, so now that we got the folder organization fixed, let's go back in here. Let's see if this will actually autofill this time. If I do get post. Okay, so I'm not wanting to. So we'll just do it manually. Let's say get post, and it should be just .. and then API like this. On this page, we're going to want to store all of our post in React state. So let's also import useState from React. So we'll import useState, and then we know that we're going to be loading in data as well. So we're going to also import useEffect as well. Both of these hooks in tandem will allow us to call getPost and store these posts in the state. If we want to load something into our state from an external source, like an API, remember that we need in React to use the useEffect hook. So inside of our component, but outside of the return here, let's write a useEffect hook. We'll write useEffect, and remember we always need to give it 2 arguments, a function and a dependency array. When we're loading data in from an API, we typically want to keep this dependency array empty unless we have a particular variable that keeps track of whether data is loaded or not. So for right now, we'll just leave it empty. And just to make it easier for you to see, I'm actually going to zoom this in one more time. The easiest way to call a function from an API inside a useEffect is to define the function inside the useEffect and then call it in the useEffect as well, because this allows us to declare the function as asynchronous. So let's define a function in here. We'll say async function. Let's just call it load all posts. And then just so we don't forget, at the very bottom here, we'll make sure to call load all posts. Now, the question is, what do we put inside this load all post function? Well, the first thing we should do is call the getPost function we imported from our API file and store it in a variable so we can use it later. To do this, I'll just make a variable. I'll call it, let's just say data for right now, and I'll set it equal to this function call. I'll say await because it's asynchronous, getPost. Just like this. Again, just to be careful, make sure you don't forget this await because this is an asynchronous function. And if you don't include the await, it's not going to wait for it to finish, so you'll just be getting a promise. Assuming all goes as planned, this data variable should contain an array of all the posts once this getPost function goes through, since this function is directly returning the array of posts grabbed from MongoDB. Therefore, we now have the posts we need, and the last step is just to store them in React state. Before we can do that, we need to make a piece of state in React to hold the posts using the useState hook. So up top here, let's just go up here and let's make a new piece of state. We'll say const. Let's call this piece of state post with a setter function of setPost. And we're going to initialize the state by calling useState. And we're going to make the default value an empty array. Now in our use effect inside this load all post function, right below where we're grabbing our data, we can now set this React state. All we need to do that is call set post and then just pass in the data we just grabbed. This sets the piece of React state post equal to the post that we just grabbed from MongoDB. All that we've effectively done in this file so far is called our API function getPost, which grabs the posts from MongoDB and returns them. And then we've stored the data in a piece of React state called posts. All we need to do now to display these posts on our homepage is to go into our JSX down here. Let's just delete the filler stuff that we've got going on so far. And then we need to map over our post array to display our info. We need some curly brackets to tell JSX that we're about to use JavaScript. And then we'll write post, which is just our piece of React state, .map. And then for each post, we want to return something. Remember that in React, map is basically just like a for loop, and it allows us to loop over some array. And then for each item in the array, we can return some JSX to display something on our page. Since we're wanting to have JSX, let's make sure inside of here we specify a return statement, and then we can specify whatever JSX in here that we want. And just to get rid of this little error here, let's actually just pass in some empty div tags here. And it would be nice in here if we could just return posts like this, but remember that we can't do that because React can't have objects as children, and post itself is an object. So what we need to do to display these is instead specify certain properties of post, like title, description, date, etc. So let's actually display a few of post properties here. And I'll do a different JSX tag for each property. So for the first one, I'm just going to do an h1 tag. And let's just say for this one, we'll do post.title. And then let me take this, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it twice. We'll do a header 2 here. And then let's do a p tag for this one. And let's just change it. So instead of having title, let's make this one say post.description. And this one will say post.dateCreated. And we're able to do these properties because you know that this post object here is part of our array, which was grabbed directly from MongoDB. So basically each one of these posts that we're mapping over here corresponds to each one of these object posts that you're seeing in MongoDB. And then each one has a title, description, and date created field. So all that this chunk of code is essentially doing is looping through every single post that we have. And for each post, we're displaying 3 things: its title, its description, and the date it was created. And for this whole file, that means all we've done so far is loaded the data from MongoDB, stored it in the React state, and then mapped over it in JSX. Let's test this now by saving our file. And voila, here you can see on our site, 3 posts just showed up, each with their own title, description, and date. This is a great starting point because we can see that it clearly worked. But let's actually make a few tweaks to this code. One thing that makes React strong is the use of reusable components. In case we need to use this format again for displaying each blog post, let's actually extract this code into a single component, and then we can just render that component wherever we want. And for the sake of simplicity, I'll just call this component a blog card, since it'll be like a small card that has basic info for a blog post. So let's actually go here into our file explorer. Let's go into our components folder that we've already made last episode, and I'm going to make a new component. We'll say blogcard.jsx. And to make the component, as always, we'll type export function blogcard. We'll want to make sure that it returns just some empty JSX for right now. And then to make this easier for us, let's actually go into this home file. Let's make sure we copy all this code here, or actually we'll just cut it. We'll cut it from here, and we'll paste it inside this component. Let's fix this ugly tabbing. So now we have the JSX extracted into its own component. One thing we need to keep in mind when we've copy and pasted this in is that these blog cards have no idea what this post object is referencing. So let's actually pass post in as a destructured prop, just like this. For a quick refresher on props, remember that if we pass in props with curly brackets, that's what we call props destructuring, and it allows us to reference the props by a specific name. So let's go ahead and save this file. And now that we have this super basic component made, let's actually head back to our home page now, and let's import that component up here. So we'll say import blog card, and then all we need to do down here is just render the component itself. So we'll just render blog card just like this. We know that this blog card component is expecting one prop called post, so we need to make sure we pass that in. So on the home page here, we're rendering it in. Within this tag here, we need to pass in a prop called post. So let's say post equals, and luckily we already have this post object here that represents our post. So we can just pass that in as our post prop, just like this. And now if we go ahead and save this file, And you can see we obviously have the exact same output as before because all the JSX is the exact same, but now it's just extracted into its own component. Now we're rendering this blog information as a component that we could reuse anywhere else in our code later on if we wanted to. There's something I want to show you real quick that you should take into consideration when loading things into React State. I've run into the problem a lot before where I get an error that says cannot map properties of undefined or something along those lines. Because there's a split second where post is undefined since the data isn't loaded in instantaneously, and then we're trying to map over undefined, which throws an error because we obviously can't loop over something that's undefined. That's why it's super important that whenever you have a piece of React state like this, like we have post here, we specify an empty array to start out with, because that actually avoids that error. Looping over an empty array is fine, but looping over undefined is not fine. So if I actually delete these square brackets here, and then I make this our default value, which would be undefined, and then I go ahead and save the page, notice how everything disappears because our page is crashed. And if I actually look at the console, I have this error here that says cannot read properties of undefined reading map. I've seen a lot of people do this use state thing where they don't give it a default value. And in full stack applications like this one, that can cause problems that get really annoying to try and debug. So I'll just add the empty array back again, go ahead and save it, and notice how everything comes back on the page and it's working fine again. So that was a short little side tangent, but long story short, if you're loading in stuff from a backend like a database, and you know the type of the state it's supposed to be, then pass in that type for the default value. So we know that post is supposed to be an array, so that's why you do an empty array. If it's going to be an object, you know you can just pass in empty curly brackets like this. If it's going to be a boolean, make sure it's either true or false by default. Hopefully you get the picture. So let's make sure this is still square brackets, save, and let's go on. On our page, all of our posts are here, with the only issue being that there is virtually no styling done. So it looks pretty hideous. Let's add some super basic CSS properties for now to make it look at least decent, which we'll expand on later. Let's make sure that this entire return here in this whole map section is surrounded by a div. So I'm going to name this div here, and let's give it its own class name so we can style it. Let's say class name equals, let's just call this one post. And then what we're also going to do is go into our blog card and we'll do the same thing. We'll give it a div, and we'll also give it a class name. And for this one, we'll just do post, but singular. And then let's head on over into our app.css file so we can do some quick styling. We'll add a class called post, and then we will also add a class called post. For post, all we want to do, let's just make display flex, and let's give flex direction as column. This will just make it so that each post inside this post class will be displayed in a vertical column instead of one big blob. And then for our post class, let's just give each one some margin and some padding. So we'll say margin, let's just give it 4 pixels. And let's do the same for padding as well. Give that one 4 pixels too. And then I also want to make them a little bit rounded on the edges. So we'll add border radius is, let's say, 10 pixels. Lastly, I just want to add some basic hover behavior for each post so that some stuff can happen style-wise whenever our mouse hovers over a post. So to add that, we can do .post, and for a certain behavior, we can do a colon, say colon hover. And then in here, all I want to do is highlight the post a certain color and then turn our mouse into a pointer. To get the pointer for our mouse, all we need to do is this. We can say cursor pointer. And then for the color, we'll need to change the background color when we hover over it. So we'll say background hyphen color. And let's just do like a light gray for right now. Let's do AAA. This will just be a light gray. If I go ahead and save this now, and I hover over these, you can see that now they're hovering gray, and you can see my mouse is now a pointer. So it doesn't exactly look beautiful, but this will do for right now. There's a few more things I want to do before we're finished up with our homepage. First of all, this date that's being displayed here for each post looks pretty ugly because it's in the JavaScript format, which is not very readable for regular people. Secondly, we should order these by the most recent. First, let's fix this date by heading up into our blog card file. Right now, this date is just being stored as a string. So let's convert it into an actual date object, which you'll see why we do that in just a moment. To convert this into an actual date, let's just go up into our function here. Let's make a new variable for it. I'll say let date equals, and we'll say new date. And then we'll just want to pass in our date string, which is just stored in post.dateCreated. Now that it is an actual date object, there is an easy function we can use that will convert it to something that is a lot more human readable. And that function is just called toString, which we can do by making a new variable. Let's just say let string date equals, And all we need to do is call the date dot to string, just like this. And then now in our JSX, instead of displaying post.date created, let's instead display that string that we just made, which is just string date. If we go ahead and save this file, notice how the string now looks a lot nicer for each date. However, it also has this extra fluff on top of it that we don't really need, like all this like standard like time zone stuff and whatnot. So let's actually just slice this string to include only the parts that we want. For right now, let's say that we don't care about day of the week, and we also don't care about any of the time zone stuff. So in our JSX, we can actually go to the string here, and we can add .slice to slice the string based on its index to only take part of the string. So if we look, for example, at this very first post, the date says Thursday, March 14th, 2024, and then it has all this time zone information. For this particular post, all I'm going to want is this March 14th, 2024. So let's slice that. Within this slice method, we'll need to actually find the indices that we need here. So let's actually go over here and count. We know that this is always going to be 3 letters. There's always a space, which means that this is always going to take up indices 0, 1, 2, and 3. So the first letter of the month here is always going to be on index 4. So we can add that as our first argument to slice. And then we also need the index where the slice is going to end. So we know this starts at index 4. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 15 should be the index where it ends at. So for the slice, we will say we want to go from index 4 to index 15. Now let's go ahead and save this file. And you can see our date looks much prettier. We're actually displaying it in a way that is readable. And actually while we're here, instead of doing this as a p tag, I'm going to do this as a header 3 tag. Oops. And save it, just so we can get the date to look a little bigger. The last thing I want to do style-wise for this homepage is order these posts by the most recent. And if you look here, they're actually already ordered by the most recent, but that's just based off of luck because that's the way I ordered them in MongoDB. But we want to actually make sure they are ordered on their own within the code. We can do that by first heading back to our home.jsx file, and this can actually be done with just one line of code. Right after we grab our post from MongoDB, we'll add this line in here, which I'm just going to copy and paste in, just like this. Basically, all this line is doing here is calls the sort method, which is a built-in method in JavaScript, and we're specifying the way that we want to actually sort the array. Basically, the way we do it is we find the difference between the two timestamps and sort it based on the difference, which would sort it so that the most recent dates are at the top of the list. If we go ahead and save our page here, nothing actually changes because, like I said, they were already sorted. However, now if we were to insert a new post, that would get sorted as well. Now that we've got most of the basic styling out of the way, there's one more thing I want to do on this homepage, and that's allowing users to actually click on a particular post and get redirected to a page where they can read the entire blog post. We already made a page for that in our folder, which we have over here, and that's just this Readblog Page right here. We also already have a route set up for this exact scenario. If we look, we go down here, and we know for the read blog, each one can take in its own ID. What I'm going to need to do is go into the blog card component and give each one a link to this route here. And each link will be unique because each card will have its own unique ID, hence why we have this ID field. Here's how we can do that. If we go back to our blog card page, let's import the link component from React Router DOM. This will allow us to link each post to its own page. Now, inside of our JSX, where we're rendering out each post, instead of making this a div here, let's actually turn this into a link instead. So I'm just going to replace div with link. Next, we just need to specify where we want this link to send us. Remember that when we made the route in app.jsx, the path here is /readblog/ and then whatever ID we want, meaning we need to fill in the ID of this post after the readblog part. If we go back to our link here, here's how we can do that. We can go ahead and write the to field like we always need for any given link. And actually inside here, we're going to do curly brackets, and then we're going to do a backtick character so that we can inject JavaScript inside the string. And then just so we can match our path, we'll write /readblog/ and now we need to fill in the ID of the post. Lucky for us, MongoDB gives us each post a unique ID. To grab this ID, all we need to do is type $ curly bracket so we can inject JavaScript into the string, and then write post._ID. And remember, _ID is how Mongo scores IDs. Let's save this page now so we can test the routing and I can show you how it works. I guess first things first, there must have been some default CSS for divs, because since we have changed to a link instead of a div, you can see the text color changed from white to like a bluish purple. But let's just go ahead and ignore that for right now. Let's test the link behavior. If I click on this first post here, you'll see this URL path becomes /readblog and then / whatever this ID is. If I go back to the main page and I click another post like this one, you can see we're still at /readblog, however the ID is different this time. This is what I like to call dynamic routing, and it's technically routing to just one route, this /readblog route, but each post can be given its own unique page by using this ID field. It's exactly why we passed this ID in the first place when we were making this route for each blog reading page. Now that we have this routing taken care of in the home page, let's head over to the Readblog page here so that we can go ahead and show you how we can uniquely display each post since we're already here. On this page, this is where we want the user to be able to read through an entire blog. So we essentially need to take one whole blog and display the title, description, content, and everything else we'll need for that blog. Lucky for us, we already have the functionality necessary to do that. If we go back to our api.js folder where we have all of our functions, remember that we made a function here that we just called getPost. We have it right down here, and this is just used to grab a single post. It requires an ID argument, and it'll just go and fetch a single post off of MongoDB based on whatever ID you give it. This function will help us to get one post information. So in our post or in our readblog.jsx file here, let's actually go up to the top here and let's actually import that getPost function. Let's import getPost from API. Now you may be wondering, how do we actually extract the ID from the post that we need to pass into this getPost function to find whatever post that we're looking for? Well, there's actually a really easy way to do that. Notice that whenever we're on this post page here for a particular post, we have this ID present in the URL because of the way we handled the routing. There is actually a hook in React Router DOM called useParams that will actually grab this ID from the URL so that we can store it in a variable. To use it, all we need to do is import it at the top here from React Router DOM. So it's called useParams, and it should autofill here to import. Once we've imported this, I'm going to go ahead and make a variable down here. I'm going to say let params equals useParams. When we use this useParams function, it actually returns an object where each param is a property of that object. So let's make a new variable. I'm going to call it ID. We'll say let ID, and we're going to set it equal to params.id since it'll store it in the ID field. Now this ID right here is equal to whatever ID was in the URL. For example, if our URL up here was like /readblog/12345, this ID variable would now hold 12345. This is super important for us because it'll allow us to find the corresponding Mongo post with this particular ID. Once we have that, we can call the API function getPost, just like we did with the home page. Let's actually go ahead and import useState and useEffect because we'll know that we're going to load in some data. So let's go ahead and import both of those just so we have them. And then we'll make a piece of React state to hold our post. Let's say we'll call it post with a setter function of setPost useState. And it's going to be an object, so let's set the default value to an empty object. And then, like always, when we're loading in data from an API, we'll want to use a useEffect hook. So we'll go ahead and write useEffect hook, and we'll do a function for the first argument and an empty dependency array for the second argument. Hopefully by now you're getting comfortable using the useEffect to call functions from the backend. And again, just like we did with the home page, we'll actually define an asynchronous function inside of here. Let's call this function, let's say async function, let's just call it load post. And then we'll make sure at the very end, we call load post. Inside of this function, we'll call our API and we'll set it equal to a variable called data. So we'll say let data equals, and we're going to call this getPost function that we imported up top. So we're going to say await getPost, just like this. And then remember, we've already captured the post ID through the params in the URL. So we can actually pass that into the getPost function here because it is expecting an ID to go out and find the post it is looking for. The last thing we'll need to do is set our post state to the result of this function call. To do that, we'll just say setPost, setPost, if I can spell today, and we will set it equal to data. I went through this code super quick, so let me really quickly summarize what all this code is doing in case you're not fully clear on it. When we're on the home page, if we go to here, we can click on any particular one of these blogs that we want. No matter what blog you click on, you'll be taken to the Readblog page, where you can read that entire blog post. When we navigate to any particular blog post, for example this one here, we navigate to the /readblog route up here, and then the ID of the post to the URL so that we can differentiate between different blog posts. And then inside this read blog component, which is this page that you're seeing, we are grabbing the ID from the URL and we're storing it in a variable. We're then just calling the getPost function, which we made in an earlier episode, that allows us to grab a single blog post from MongoDB based on its ID. Once we have that, we just store it in a piece of state or a piece of React state called post. Now that we have that information stored in post, we can display whatever we want on this page. We'll worry about most of our styling later, but for right now, let's just display all the properties we have for each post. So first of all, I'll make a header 1 tag for the title. So we're just going to say post.title. I'm going to go ahead and take this, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it 3 times here, and let's change these around. I'll make this one header 2, this one header 3, and this bottom one will be a p tag. Make sure to change these to match. Header 2, header 3, and this is a p tag. And this one will display, let's say, the description, and this one will display the date it was created. And in this one, let's actually display all the content of the blog post. We're putting the content in a p tag because this is the actual paragraph text you would see on a typical blog post. Let's go ahead and now save this file. And you can see we now have all this text on our screen for this blog post. Let's actually real quick go back to our home page and just click on it to make sure it works correctly. If I just click on one of these posts, let's say this very bottom one here, you can see we've navigated to the /readblog route as well as the ID of this particular post. And we're uniquely displaying the title, description, date, and content of this particular blog post on this page. If I return back to the home page and I click on another blog post, you can see that the content is entirely different. And again, all of these pages are going to the /readblog route, but because they each have their own unique ID, they are all fetching something that is completely unique from one another. Whenever we made the blog cards for the homepage, we ended up making this date here look a little nicer. So let's do the same exact thing on this page as well. So let's go up here back into our load post function where we're actually grabbing the post, and let's change how this date actually looks. First, let's just go in here and let's say let date equals new date. And we're going to pass in the actual date from this data object. So we'll say data.dateCreated. This will just turn this variable into a new date. And then let's actually take that same field, that data.dateCreated, and let's set it equal to date.toString. And if we go ahead and save it, this will make the date a lot more readable. We still want to get rid of this whole extra gunk though. So let's do the same slice that we did last time. Let's go down here. Let's do the same slice. We're going to do slice. And we're going to pass in, I think it was 4 to 15. Oh, oops, actually, I shouldn't be slicing the content. I should be slicing date created. So I'm going to go back down here, slice, and it was 4 to 15. If I go ahead and save it, we may actually get an error when we refresh. I'm going to check it real quick. Okay, yeah, so the page actually crashed here and gave us an error. And if we open up our console here, it'll say, cannot read properties of undefined, reading slice. That's because there's a split second where this data isn't fully loaded in, and then we're trying to access this .slice method on something that doesn't actually exist since post.dateCreated doesn't exist yet. A quick fix to this would actually just to be go in front of the slice here in front of this dot and just add a question mark in front of us here. What this question mark does is reads the methods after the dot only if what you're accessing isn't undefined. So we go ahead and save this, and you can see we can refresh and whatnot, and our page is back to normal. Great, so we're almost actually done. Next, just as a small convenience thing, I just want to add a quick button on this read blog page that allow us to navigate back to the previous page. That way we don't have to keep clicking home to go back and forth between each of these posts. So let's see if we can look at one of these pages here. And in this JSX here, I'm actually just going to add, I'll just add it at the very top for right now. I'm going to go ahead and add a button. It'll just say back, and it'll take us back to the previous page. We'll add an onClick property here. And then whenever this button is clicked, we want to navigate back one page. There's actually a really easy way to do this in React Router. We just need to import a function called useNavigate from React Router DOM. So we'll go up here and we'll just import useNavigate. Use navigate is kind of like link, where it allows us to traverse between pages, except use navigate is used within JavaScript code, not JSX. In your onClick property here, let's just write a little arrow function here, and we can just say use navigate, and then we can plug in -1. -1 in the context of this situation will just take you back one page, which is exactly what you want. However, if we go ahead and save this and click back, you'll notice nothing actually happens. And if we look at our console here, it's telling us that we have an error. It'll say that it's an invalid hook call. It's important to remember that we can't unfortunately just call hooks like this in React. So we'll have to make an alias for use navigate. So up top here, let's just go up here where we're doing use params. Let's just say const navigate equals use navigate, so we can make an alias for it. And then down here, instead of calling use navigate, let's just call the navigate alias we just made. And it'll behave the exact same, but it'll actually work this time. I'll go ahead and click save here. And now if I press back, it'll actually take us back to whatever page we were on previously. Great, so now we have the home page working just as intended, and we also have the Readblog page working just fine too. This video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to go ahead and end this episode here. In this episode, we built out the bulk of our homepage using our blog data from MongoDB, and we also built a dedicated page where each blog can be fully read by using dynamic routing. In the next episode, we'll finish up our React pages by fleshing out the create post page, as well as the about us and contact pages. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.